account, we're in Crane Crater. So rejoin us this evening.
In the morning of August 14th, 2005, dawned bright and clear over Cyprus. At Larnaca Airport, Helios Airways Flight 522, a Boeing 737-300 bound for Athens with a connecting leg to Prague, was being prepared for takeoff. On board were 115 passengers and 6 crew members, many of them Cypriot vacationers and families. The captain was 58-year-old veteran German pilot Hans-Jürgen Merten, accompanied by 51-year-old Cypriot First Officer Pambos Charalambous. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Please subscribe now, Red Dot Aviation. Before departure, a junior engineer performed a routine pressurization system check. To test the cabin pressure, he set the pressurization mode selector to manual. After the test, he failed to reset it to auto. This simple oversight set in motion an irreversible chain of events. The handwritten technical log sign-off was ambiguous, and during the quick turnaround flight preparation, both pilots missed the incorrect setting. At 9:07, Flight 522 rumbled down the runway and lifted smoothly into the Mediterranean sky. As it climbed through 12,000 feet, the first warnings began. A master caution light illuminated, and a chirping horn sounded. The cabin altitude warning, indicating that the air inside the plane was becoming as thin as the air outside. The pilots, however, misinterpreted the signal. They believed it was the takeoff configuration warning, which sounds similar and also involves a horn. They checked their flaps and throttles. Everything was correct. Confused, they pressed on. The pressurization system, left in manual mode, had not automatically begun to pump compressed air into the cabin. As the plane continued its ascent to its cruising altitude of 34,000 feet, the cabin pressure plummeted. The oxygen masks in the passenger cabin automatically dropped from the ceiling. In the cockpit, however, the pilots' emergency oxygen masks were manual. They had to physically reach for them, and for reasons that remain unclear, they did not. Hypoxia, a lack of oxygen to the brain, is an insidious killer. It doesn't cause panic, it induces a state of euphoric confusion. Within minutes, the captain and first officer would have become disoriented, their cognitive functions shutting down one by one. The last intelligible communication from the cockpit was at 9:30, when the first officer reported a problem with the air conditioning. Then, silence. Flight 522 continued on its autopilot set course, a ghost ship flying through the brilliant blue sky. It passed its intended turning point over Athens and flew on, its transponder now emitting the code for a radio failure, 7600. Inside, a scene of horror unfolded. The passengers and cabin crew, using the chemical oxygen generators in the masks, would have had about 15 minutes of supplemental oxygen. When that ran out, they too succumbed to hypoxia. Everyone on board was likely unconscious or dead long before the fuel ran out. As the flight failed to respond to repeated radio calls, Greek air traffic control scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets to intercept it. The jets climbed to meet the silent 737. What the pilots saw through the cockpit windows would become the central mystery of the tragedy. One fighter pilot reported seeing 2 figures in the cockpit, not slumped over the controls, but moving. One was in the captain's seat, the other was entering the cockpit from behind. Then a third figure appeared. A man, not in a pilot's uniform. He entered the cockpit and sat in the captain's chair. The fighter pilots watched, mesmerized and helpless, as this mystery man took control of the aircraft. He was later described as young, with a beard, wearing a blue shirt. who was he? He was Andreas Prodromou, a 25-year-old flight attendant. A former Greek Air Force conscript, Prodromou had basic knowledge of aircraft controls. As hypoxia took hold, he had likely been in the rear of the plane. He might have accessed a portable oxygen cylinder, the kind used for medical emergencies or for crew to move around the cabin during a depressurization. For nearly 2 hours, he fought to stay conscious, alone among the dead and dying, as the plane flew on. When the engines eventually flamed out from fuel exhaustion, the plane began its slow, silent descent. It was at this moment, with the loss of power, that the cockpit oxygen systems may have briefly reactivated, or the change in altitude may have partially roused Prodromou. He made his way to the cockpit. His heroic last-ditch effort was not to save the plane. That was impossible, but to regain control and steer it away from populated areas on the ground below. He was the figure the fighter pilots saw. He grabbed the controls, fighting to keep the 737 level. But it was too late, and his experience was too little. At 12:04 p.m., Helios Airways Flight 522 banked sharply and plunged into the hills near Grammatico, 25 miles north of Athens. The impact was catastrophic, killing everyone on board instantly. The mother of First Officer Charalambous claimed that her son had repeatedly complained to Captain Merten about the aircraft getting cold. Passengers also reported problems with air conditioning on Helios flights. During the 10 weeks before the accident aircraft's environmental control system had been repaired or inspected 7 times. On 29 August 2005, Helios Airways announced successful safety checks on their Boeing fleet and put them back into service. The airline later changed its name to Alpha Jet. However, when Cypriot authorities detained the company's aircraft and froze the company's bank accounts about a year later, the airline announced that it would stop operating on 31st October 2006. The subsequent investigation definitively ruled out terrorism. The cause was a catastrophic chain of errors. The engineer's failure to reset the pressurization switch, the pilot's fatal misinterpretation of the warning horn, and a corporate culture at Helios that had been criticized for cutting corners. The mystery person in the cockpit was not a terrorist, but a hero. Andreas Prodromou, the flight attendant, had stayed alive against impossible odds, and, in the final minutes of the flight, had tried desperately to land the plane, saving untold lives on the ground as he guided the aircraft away from Athens and into the empty Greek countryside. Thank you for watching this complete video. Please share your thoughts in comment section and subscribe our YouTube channel, Red Dot Aviation.